I've made quite a few beats using the Ableton Move in just this first month that I've had it, and I just want to say, back in 2017, I made a video and I predicted an Ableton app and a push mini. What's up everybody, this is TAETRO, and today I'm going to gaze into my crystal ball and give you my music tech predictions of 2017. I think we will see the release of an Ableton official iOS app. I think in 2017 we will see the release of a push micro or a push mini. This may be something that goes along with the app that I just talked about, or it could be a standalone thing that works with typical Ableton Live. Yeah, I've been doing this way too long. An Ableton Move is not a push mini, it's kind of far from that. And I suppose we should set our expectations accordingly, because if they wanted it to be a push mini, they would have called it push mini. Instead, they called it Move, which is something totally different. But that doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. So today I'm going to talk about some improvements that I would love to see on Ableton Move. Let's jump right in with a couple small ones. Right now, my Ableton Move is connected via USB-C. That's how I'm recording it. I'm running it into my DAW, and audio is flowing via the USB-C cable. However, as I'm doing that, the speaker is also playing out loud. So I'm hearing it through my headphones, and then I'm also hearing it through the speaker. The only way to turn the speaker off in this situation is to plug something into the headphone jack on the back. Now the speaker is off. Minor improvement I would like, just give me the option to turn the speaker off in the settings. For now, we'll just leave this little loose cable here, I guess. I asked folks on Instagram if they had any improvements they would like to see in Ableton Move. One community member wants to see the ability to add default templates to the Move, meaning that every time you start a new project, you can create what is the default template. That would be very helpful, so you don't have to go through and select your instruments each time or what effects are on each of the 4 tracks, even if you are going to swap out the sounds. But this is something I don't even think we have on Ableton Push standalone yet, unless they drop that with an update and I missed it. Please let me know. But yes, being able to set our own default templates is not a lot to ask, I think. Another recommendation from the community that I very much agree with is a probability feature. This person also requests a groove amount per track instead of an entire project's groove, which I don't even think we have in live yet, so I'm not sure if we'll see that. But yes, probability would be a huge feature that could unlock even more possibilities in a limited box like Move. Only 4 tracks, limited sequence size in general. However, if I could change, say the kick, if I could add a little special kick in here on the step sequencer and make that only happen 25% of the time, or play once, skip 3. The polyend play has that kind of probability. Electron boxes have this kind of probability. The newest IRA device from Roland, the P6, has this. They have percentage probability as well as happen once every 4 times kind of probability, which allows you to take a pattern that can only be 4 pages long and technically like double it or triple it just by using probability. So probability is a feature I would love to see on Ableton Move. Next up, the 4th note mode. So if I go to my bass instrument here, I actually kind of like this note layout here for bass lines. It's fun to jam on. But you can see that the notes are laid out so that you have a scale on each line. In this instance, I have a minor scale. Let's go to a synth track. In some cases, like I just showed, that's fun, but in other cases, it's not fun, like when you have to play chords, for instance. The way to play a triad is to do this. So that becomes really difficult to play chord progressions, because if I want to play just basic triads, I can only get so far before it becomes a little too complicated. Let's see how far we can get. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then suddenly, if I want to play higher notes, I have to go to the next line. So it's not really cohesive for playing chords, but luckily we've had another note mode that is way more convenient for playing on grid instruments for quite some time. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so we're gonna walk over to push right now, and you can see that the notes are arranged kind of differently. The darker notes are our root notes, and all the other notes in between are notes in the scale. But this means we can play a scale across as well as up the instrument. And that means I can use this triangle shape to play chords. So much more convenient than how it currently is on Move. So just imagine, cut push in half, these first 4 rows, give us this note arrangement on Move, please. And on the note of chords, on that note, a chord mode in general would be very helpful. If we could just play a single pad and I'll have a whole chord play. Now, I might pull over another device here, the Launchkey Mini, the newest ones that launched. They actually have a pretty good implementation of chord mode, and it makes a good pairing with Ableton Move, I have to say. Things like the APC64 also has a good implementation of a chord mode so that you can just play a single pad and play full chords, which makes it really easy to create chord progressions on a grid instrument. So on the Launchkey in user chord mode, I've created my own chords here. And this is a good alternative to having to play those complex shapes on a note layout like this. Bonus points that on this little screen, the Launchkey even gives you a note-by-note layout of the notes in the chord, and building these chords of your own is super easy too. Then there's also the more traditional approach where basically Novation just built in chord sets into their Launchkey. So these are just pre-made sets of basic chord progressions in a key. Easy one-note chords. Would love to see that come to the Ableton Move, but for now, Launchkey is not a bad pairing to go with Move, especially if you're just more comfortable playing on keys anyway. And I know we're talking about improvements, but one thing that I think is interesting that I kind of like about Move and MIDI controllers is the way that using MIDI controllers with hardware usually works is that the controller sends MIDI on a specific channel and that corresponds to a specific track on hardware. So usually, even though we have a drum kit and then a few more synths, and then 3 other synths on the Move, I don't have to change the channel of the MIDI controller every time. I can just switch instruments and it performs more like an actual DAW with a controller would. So when I switch tracks here, I get access to all these different instruments. Just a little note there, it's different from the usual MIDI controller to hardware connection, and I don't mind it. But enough about Launchkey, this isn't about you, this is about Move. Okay, actually, it's about the SB404 as well. So there's a feature on the 404 that I think would be fantastic on the Ableton Move, because in these drum racks, we can actually load quite long samples. We don't have to load these short drum one-shots. However, as a function of how drum racks work, I believe the longest a sample can actually play for in a drum rack is 60 seconds. I think there's a way to cheat it so that you can get 2 minutes, but I'm not 100% on that. Regardless, if we could rework drum racks so that we could play fully long samples, like maybe up to 4-minute long samples in this, it would unlock even more capability out of the drum rack and push the limitations of Move further. The reason I bring up the 404 is because you can put super long samples into a sample slot on the 404, but not only that, when you sequence them, you can set it so you have only a 4-bar sequence, but have a long sample playing, and it won't re-trigger that sample until it finishes. So you could have a 4-bar pattern and something like an 8-minute sample playing, and it's not going to keep re-triggering from the beginning of that sample until it plays all the way through the full 8 minutes. I think that's a pretty cool feature and could unlock a lot of performance possibilities with Move. All right, next up, this is a simple one, but sidechain. Please give us the ability to sidechain. I've got this floor to the floor kick. I've got these pads. I just want them to be ducking with the kick. Yes, we could automate volume, but I'm not looking for a workaround here. And even if it's a very simple implementation, if Ableton Move assumes that we're going to have a drum rack on track 1 and that the kick will always be this first sample slot, just set it so that by default, this is the sidechain source. Even if you don't allow us to select a different sidechain source, just give us the basic implementation of, hey, this is probably going to be your kick. This is always the sidechain source. Let me go into the menu, select a sidechain level for each track, and just keep it simple. But even the simplest implementation of sidechain would love to see it. Okay, I have 2 big improvements that I really need to go deep with to get into next that have to do with the step sequencer and with controller mode, but I'm gonna tell you about those after I tell you a little bit about our sponsor, DistroKid. Been using them since well before they sponsored the channel, so if you need to get your music on different streaming platforms, just give a listen. I was first attracted to DistroKid because they have the Be Prolific model, which means you just pay once per year and upload as much music as you want, not paying per release or anything. And aside from the basic functionality of getting your music onto all the places it needs to go, like Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, Instagram, etc., they have a bunch of extras for artists that I find to be really useful. You can generate things like promo cards if you need a quick graphic to promote your release, and you can also create a hyperfollow page to help people pre-save your track before it comes out, but that page also exists after the track is released, which allows you to put a link to every single place where your music exists, all those different stores, so whoever you're sharing the link with, they find the link that they need. You can also add more links to that, so if I create a YouTube video with a live session from one of the tracks from my album, which I did, I can add that to the hyperfollow page for that album. No website building experience required, and you just get a one-stop link. Oh, my new album's out, here's all the things I want you to see. Here's the merch, here's the video, here's the actual releases. That's a feature of DistroKid, which I think is cool. So if you sign up today, you can get 7% off your first year with DistroKid. I've been using them for a long time, like I said, since well before they ever became a sponsor, and I've never had any issues. When you support the sponsor, you support the channel. But for now, let's get back into talking about Move. All right, big idea here for the step sequencer on the Ableton Move. Currently, how the step sequencer works is that we have, for drums for instance, our drum grid here, and that this is our step sequencer here on the bottom. So we have 16 steps here, and I can scroll through bar by bar across the sequence, and I can insert notes onto the step sequence, etc. That's a pretty standard step sequencer. I can select the snare, and I can insert a snare across all these steps and make it just wild. Oh, why not? Okay, that's fine. However, what I find is that sometimes I'm playing in live, and then other times I'm focusing just on step sequencing. If I want to focus just on step sequencing, then this whole interface is geared specifically for playing in live, and we only get these little limited 16 buttons at the bottom. What if we reversed these? So what if we had a 32-step sequencer here on the grid, and we used the bottom row of pads to select drums? So if instead of selecting drums here on the grid, we would have all 16 notes of the drum rack here on the bottom. We would just be using this to select a note, and then we could use 4 rows here to do step sequencing, which gives us a lot more space. We can see more at once, and it also means less scrolling for longer sequences. This could work for note sequences too. If I go to a note device, we could use this bottom row here to select our pitches and then have the step sequencer here on the grid. I'm not saying replace these typical modes with that mode, but I'm saying let me just, use the shift functionality to go into the alternate step sequencing mode like we've laid out here. Let me know if you think that's a good idea. Okay, the final and possibly my biggest pet peeve about the Move as it currently stands is its controller mode functionality, or lack of functionality, I should say. A community member recommended full control over Live's mixer in controller mode, which yes, it is a little clunky to get control over the full mixer in controller mode. They also want to see MPE pads come to the Move, but I think that's more of a hardware thing. I don't think that's something we'll see in a firmware update. Personally, I'm happy with just some aftertouch. Not a deal breaker for me to not have MPE. But let's get into the controller mode. I've been in standalone mode this whole time, so let's just switch it real quick. Okay, so now that I'm in controller mode, you can see that in Live, I've got the red box around this section of clips that I'm controlling. I can switch Move to be in session mode, so I get access to 7 tracks, keep that in mind, plus the main track. Hold that in the back of your mind, because that's going to cause issues later. You can see that this session view matches session view on the screen. Okay, that's what we would expect. When it comes to playing notes, it works a little differently to how we would expect. We have 4 tracks here, just like we would in standalone mode. So I can control this drum rack. I can switch to this harp instrument, an analog lab synth, and an electric piano sound. Cool. How do I get to the next 4 tracks? Well, I can't do it from this screen, I think, and I'm looking for people to call me out if I'm wrong here. I've read the manual and I've been trying to work through this, and it works in a really clunky way. These scroll buttons are for the sequence, are for the loop, which is, I think, a little bit strange. But if I go into session mode, the manual says to bring a track into focus in note mode, we can select it in live. So track 5, if we go back into note mode, if I want to select track 5, sure enough, it comes into focus, but I had to use my mouse to do that. Okay, let's say I don't want to use my mouse. I can go back to session view and I can select this drum rack, go back over here, and I can do it that way. So let's go back. Let's select that flute sound, which is track 5. Come back to note mode. Okay, it works. And then from there, I have access to the next track and the next track. But remember how I said keep the 7-track thing in mind, because now I can't select the 8th track, which is another drum kit. This is just empty. This button just currently does nothing. And that's because the red box is what's kind of telling Move what it's able to control. So what I really need to do is go to session view and move this red box over. Now go back to note mode. And what's odd is I have access to the last 3 tracks now, but let's see if we can fix that. So I have access to tracks 6, 7, and 8 instead of 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's see if we can fix that. Let's select track 5. What I'm expecting is now we have tracks 5, 6, 7, 8, but that's not true. We have access to 2, 3, 4, 5. And now if I bring into focus track 6, we have access to 6, 7, 8. So I'm not sure if this is a bug. Maybe this is not how it's supposed to work. All I'm saying is what we should have access to is the ability to scroll through tracks while in note mode. I shouldn't have to jump back into session view and select tracks. I shouldn't have to touch my mouse to select tracks. I should simply be able to either use these arrow keys to scroll through the different tracks in my session, or maybe a shift functionality. I hold shift and these 2 buttons here become like a scroll left and right situation, scroll left in the session, scroll right in the session. I just think that this is a weird implementation, and this is an Ableton made device. I was expecting the controller functionality to be like some of the best controller functionality of any of the MIDI controllers for live out there. To be fair, this isn't a controller first. However, this is very basic functionality that things like the Launchkey, Launchpads have. Akai APC64 has similar functionality. I should simply be able to scan through my whole session and not have this weird box that only encapsulates 7 tracks at a time. It just causes problems when you talk about like navigating around the session. It doesn't make sense. So please, a more fluid process for selecting different tracks in Ableton Live in controller mode with Move. Those are my recommendations for an update for Ableton Move. I'm not sure if they'll implement any of these. It would be great to see some of them implemented. If there are some things you would like to see come to the Move, oh, we want more than 4 tracks. We want more than 4 tracks. Yeah, we get it. You want more than 4 tracks. So do I. Go challenge yourself to make a bunch of tracks and limit yourself to 4 tracks, and then come back and say that. I know how you feel. We want more tracks, but see how far you can push the 4-track experience, especially with 16-note mode on the drum rack. If you have other feedback other than the one everybody keeps repeating, would love to hear it down in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, you might enjoy my breakdown of this Ableton Move performance that Ableton posted. It actually really shows the capability of 16 notes on pads and really breaks the paradigm of like only 4 tracks. So go check that out. Thank you so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.